An Argentine political operative was arrested in Bolivia after his former business partner survived a shooting by a hired gun and accused him, from her hospital bed, of running a bribery and bot farm operation across right-wing campaigns in Latin America. His business partner back in the United States is Donald Trump's former campaign manager.
This is the Daily Pulse for August 25th, 2026. Okay, let's dive into this. You know that explosive story about digital operatives, cross-border hitmen, and deep political ties? It's not just some crazy movie plot headline. It is absolutely the perfect entry point into a much wider, kind of alarming phenomenon we're seeing unfold globally. We are tracking a very distinct pattern right now of how power, capital, and influence operate today, and they're doing it completely unbothered by borders or basic oversight.
Section 1. The transnational influence machine, crossing borders and moving capital. Now, that opening hook of a bot farm and bribery op being seamlessly exported across Latin America and tying right back to US political operatives, that directly shows us how political influence and dark money treat the entire globe as a single, interconnected marketplace. To really grasp the financial mechanics making this kind of cross-border operation possible, we first need to lock down a core concept. Have you ever heard the term beneficial owner? It's the true individual who ultimately owns or controls an asset, property, or corporate entity, but they are very often hidden behind complex legal structures or shell companies. This is basically the ultimate tool for global leaders and operatives when they need to obscure their finances. If you want to move massive amounts of money without leaving your fingerprints everywhere, you bury the beneficial ownership.
So how does this actually play out in practice? We're seeing it across entirely different continents. An investigation by El País found that in Bolivia, the beneficial owners of major institutions like Visa and Banco Nacional de Bolivia can be traced directly back to holding structures in Panama. And when regulators asked for information, they simply got no response. Meanwhile, a judicial order reported by OK Diario actually names Spain's former Prime Minister, José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, as the beneficial owner of a Dubai shell network. This network was allegedly used for illegal bailout commissions. And then, in a much less sophisticated but honestly equally brazen move, Mediapart reports that the president of Chad and his delegation dropped 867,000 euros at a Paris hotel, paying almost entirely in cash. Because, right, nothing says legitimate state business quite like settling a near million-euro hotel tab with physical banknotes. The transnational influence machine is actively moving money, and regulators are, by and large, failing to do anything about it.
Let's bring this into domestic politics. The Byline Time is reporting that a gold bullion firm paid more than 400,000 British pounds to Nigel Farage, a highly prominent British politician. But here is the really critical, deeply ironic part of all this. While paying him this massive sum, that very same firm was simultaneously releasing material warning that a future reform UK government could trigger domestic violence and unrest. They were explicitly framing this fear of violence as a reason for people to buy their gold. It's a pretty stark example, right? Financial interests are directly funding political figures while simultaneously profiting off the exact instability those same figures are associated with.
Section 2. The illusion of accountability. Formal processes, quiet failures.
This illusion of accountability? This is literally the core thematic spine connecting all the intelligence we're looking at today. Across multiple, totally unrelated sectors, we are seeing the exact same pattern repeat. Formal accountability mechanisms are ticking all the administrative boxes right on schedule while completely failing to verify what they're actually supposed to. Take this environmental case. A joint report by Global Voices and Amenaza Roboto reviewed 25 years of NASA satellite data. They proved that a state-owned Entel data center in Uruguay created a highly measurable physical heat island effect over the area. Yet, a formal impact assessment for a nearby Google data center, a facility that is 5 times larger, mind you, assessed absolutely zero heat island effect. So the formal process was completed, all the paperwork was filed beautifully, but the biological reality captured by a quarter century of NASA data was just entirely ignored.
We see this exact same illusion in defense spending too. ProPublica dug into a Department of Defense Inspector General report and did dozens of interviews. They revealed that taxpayers funded a $533 million artillery plant contracted to General Dynamics. The formal bidding and funding processes worked perfectly. They dispersed $500 million without a hitch. But the quiet failure here is staggering. That plant never produced a single usable artillery shell. Not one. $500 million and 0 shells to show for it.
And look, this isn't just an isolated incident. We're talking about systemic administrative capture. ProPublica is actually launching a much broader series on the Pentagon's opaque $1 trillion budget.
They're citing Government Accountability Office findings that point out major weapons programs have literally never passed a full financial audit. Think about that. The mechanisms of oversight exist in name only, which allows massive defense contracts like that artillery plant to operate without verifiable production or any real financial transparency.
We also see this massive failure in the financial sector's compliance systems. There's older reporting surfacing right now in this intelligence cycle from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, involving leaked suspicious activity reports. It shows that in 2019, the financial giant Fidelity actually opened a corporate brokerage account for a company controlled by Jeffrey Epstein. Fidelity then processed millions in wire transfers for his network. The formal banking safeguards only finally kicked in and restricted the account days after his highly publicized arrest. So the compliance process existed on paper, sure, but it completely failed to proactively stop the flow of illicit funds.
Section 3. Dark Money and Strategy. The Mechanics of Influence.
Now that we've seen how unmonitored influence operations move their money and how these so-called accountability systems utterly fail to stop them, we have to ask a crucial question. How are these unmonitored funds shaping direct political strategies? Well, to understand this next piece of intelligence, we just need to briefly define AIPAC. That's the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It's a very well-known organization that lobbies the US government to enact pro-Israel policies, and they operate various political action committees, or PACs, that fund political campaigns.
The investigative outlet Sludge reports a really fascinating strategic maneuver here. A super PAC, which is funded largely by AIPAC's political arm, quietly spent over $450,000 boosting a candidate in Massachusetts named Nguyen. Now, what makes this so deeply counterintuitive is that they boosted her despite her vocal criticism of actions in Gaza. This perfectly illustrates how dark money groups are executing incredibly complex, multi-layered strategies right now. It's not just about blindly funding pure allies anymore. Sometimes it's a strategic deployment of capital designed to shape a much broader electoral outcome, just quietly pulling the levers behind the scenes.
And these maneuvers aren't happening in a vacuum. They're serving a much broader ideological shift. A piece in Foreign Affairs by a Carnegie Fellow recently analyzed the emerging strategy of the political New Right. So the crucial point is this: they are actively building a massive post-Trump grand strategy. The ultimate goal here is to replace the long-standing framework of liberal internationalism with a brand new theoretical doctrine they're calling civilizationism. It's a fundamental rethinking of global alliances and domestic policy from the ground up, and it's being funded and propelled by the exact same networks of influence we are tracking today.
When these networks successfully capture the administrative state, the public harm isn't abstract. It's direct and highly measurable. The Brennan Center analyzed a record outbreak of cyclospora, which is a parasitic illness linked to fresh produce. They traced this huge public health failure directly back to older sustained food industry lobbying. That lobbying successfully delayed an FDA food traceability rule for nearly 2 decades, 17 years to be exact. The formal rulemaking process was entirely hijacked by influence politics, stalling basic safety regulations for 17 years and resulting in real, tangible sickness for everyday people. And this brilliantly illustrates Section 4, Institutional Integrity Under Pressure, Policy and Real-World Consequences.
When accountability is basically an illusion and influence machines dictate strategy, the institutions themselves start to buckle. And when institutions buckle, it's everyday workers and citizens who bear the real-world consequences. Just look at the economic toll over in Ecuador. The outlet Prometheus is reporting that the Ecuadorian government just spent $148 million on public employee layoffs. And it gets even more shocking. This massive payout for firing workers was financed entirely by taking on more national debt. This drastic move is largely being driven by the International Monetary Fund's aggressive push for continued payroll restraint in the country. It's a perfect example of how international institutional pressure directly reshapes, and often harms, domestic livelihoods.
Back in the United States, civil service institutions are under their own intense pressure. Have you heard of Schedule F? It's a U.S. government employment classification designed to strip standard civil service protections from federal employees deemed to be in policymaking roles. Government Executive is reporting that federal unions are currently reviving a massive lawsuit to fight this rule. They're trying to protect an estimated 50,000 federal workers from suddenly losing their employment protections. This is a direct, ongoing battle over the fundamental integrity and independence of the institutional workforce.
Institutional failure also hits your wallet directly.
Consumer Reports just documented how the massive, truly unprecedented energy demands of new artificial intelligence data centers are driving up electric bills for ordinary ratepayers. While the tech industry expands at this breakneck pace, it's everyday people who are heavily subsidizing the massive power grid upgrades required to keep them running. And yeah, the White House has issued a ratepayer pledge to supposedly address this, but that pledge remains strictly non-binding. It offers absolutely zero formal enforceable protection for consumers. Finally, this institutional pressure is also completely reshaping foreign policy effectiveness. A recent analysis in Foreign Affairs objectively assesses the maximum pressure campaign previously deployed by Donald Trump against Iran. Their analysis argues that this escalating campaign is fundamentally failing to force any real capitulation. Actually, it has actively undercut the traditional diplomatic and pressure playbook we've relied on for decades. It's proving that standard, traditional, institutional approaches to foreign relations are just breaking down entirely under these new political paradigms.
So, as we watch global capital move effortlessly across borders today, and as we witness defense contracts, environmental reviews, and compliance departments relentlessly produce the paperwork of oversight without any of the reality of it, this is the vital question to carry with you. What formal accountability processes are completing on schedule right now while quietly failing to verify the truth? You can find links to all the source articles we use for this explainer down in the description below.